Imagine living entire days without a single moment of privacy. That was everyday life aboard a Viking ship. The North Sea roars beneath a steel-gray sky as a narrow vessel pushes forward through icy waves. On its open deck, more than 60 men survive shoulder to shoulder. Soaked clothing, cutting winds, exhausted bodies. Weeks without touching land. And no latrine. No space meant for privacy. Each sunrise brought a fatigue that sank deep into their bones, along with the same constant threat. In an environment like that, a single illness could spread uncontrollably. For most people, such conditions would cause serious health problems in very little time. But not for them. The Vikings crossed oceans, survived storms, and reached America 5 centuries before Columbus, in ships that, by all logic, should have been floating tombs. How did they do it? What did they understand that we have forgotten? Today you will discover the survival system that allowed them to travel for weeks without falling ill. A set of practices that, combined, made the impossible possible. To fully understand it, stay until the end. And if you're fascinated by the real mysteries of our past, subscribe to CronoPlanet. Here, we uncover history like no one else does. To understand how they managed to survive, we first need to look at the environment they lived in. A Viking ship had no decks, no interior levels. Everything happened in a single open space. Eating, sleeping, rowing, living together without any separation. That closeness turned the voyage into a perfect place for disease to spread. Clothes took days to dry, blankets stayed cold, and the wood continuously let water seep through. There was no system to manage even the most basic bodily functions. Cold pierced through layers and skin. Food could become contaminated in minutes, and cuts or scrapes were a constant risk. Meanwhile, dozens of lungs shared the same heavy, humid air. Modern epidemiology suggests that an average person today would likely fall ill within 24 to 48 hours in such conditions. But they did not. They didn't collapse or fall sick in large numbers. And the most surprising part is tied to something we find especially uncomfortable today. On a Viking ship, the very idea of going to the bathroom didn't exist. Waste was thrown straight into the sea. During storms, buckets were used and emptied as soon as possible. The rule was simple. Nothing should remain on board. Paradoxically, what we would now consider unsanitary worked better than the systems used by sailors centuries later. Why? What invisible factor protected them from inevitable disaster? Here begins the search. To continue, we must dismantle another common idea. The word Viking is often associated with chaos, violence, disorder. But at sea, the reality was exactly the opposite. In such a narrow, constantly moving space, every action had a purpose. The slightest distraction could put the group in danger. 60 men, sharing a wooden rectangle in perpetual motion, sleeping on blankets and storing their belongings beneath the benches where they rowed. There was no place to isolate oneself, yet it worked. It worked because life on board followed clear roles and a discipline that depended not on a captain, but on culture. The man steering the ship could not be interrupted. The man setting the rowing rhythm maintained the vessel's coordination. The man distributing food had to do so with precision. Even rest followed strict rules. This silent order repeated stroke after stroke, night after night. And there was something even deeper. Neater, dishonor. On a ship where everyone saw and heard everything, no one wanted to be the one who endangered the rest. Thus, without formal structures, the ship functioned like a perfectly coordinated organism. Yet even with this impeccable discipline, they still lived under extreme conditions. Humidity, cold, overcrowding, stale air, open wounds, delicate food supplies. So, how is it possible they didn't suffer the outbreaks that decimated sailors in later centuries? The first clue is so simple that it often goes unnoticed. It wasn't their weapons, nor their strength, not even their discipline. It was what they drank. Understanding this brings us closer to the heart of their survival method. And now begins the journey through the strategies that allowed them to cross seas that would have been deadly for others. 1. The secret of living water. If there was one element capable of deciding life or death on a Viking voyage, that element was water. Not because of its scarcity, but because of its fragility. In a world without filters, without science, and without modern tools, a single contaminated sip could trigger fever, diarrhea, or dehydration. And under such harsh conditions, that could destroy an entire crew. Even so, Norse travelers had learned to avoid that risk with remarkable effectiveness. The first step was choosing the right water. They did not drink from puddles, stagnant pools, or murky rivers. They sought fast currents, places where movement carried impurities away. They didn't know microbiology, but they could read nature with a precision inherited from centuries of observation. Clarity, smell, movement, and temperature. After gathering it, the water was stored in barrels sealed with resin, a material that helped close pores, limit leakage, and slow deterioration. It was not perfect protection, but it made the difference between falling ill in days or remaining stable throughout the journey. Still, the Vikings understood something many later sailors ignored. Fresh water spoils quickly when stored. That is why they rarely used it as their main drink. Their real strategy lay in two liquids, common in their culture: light beer and fermented whey. Both drinks, seemingly humble, offered extraordinary safety. In many cases, beer was made with boiled water, which killed a significant portion of microorganisms. Fermented whey became acidic, creating an environment where many pathogenic bacteria cannot survive. Without knowing it, they had created a hydration system comparable to accidental pasteurization. Sometimes they added juniper, yarrow, or other aromatic plants, mostly out of tradition. Today we know many of these herbs contain mild antimicrobial compounds, an extra reinforcement, even if they didn't understand it scientifically. Thus, while sailors in later centuries fell ill from stagnant water, the Vikings relied on liquids that could remain safe for weeks without contamination. Now think about this for a moment. If you were on that open, freezing, damp ship with no comforts, would you know what to drink to avoid risking your life? What we do know is that they, without science or technology, developed an effective method based on experience, tradition, and observation of nature. And although this tool protected them, half of the system was still missing: what they ate and how that strengthened their resistance. 2. The hidden power of living foods. Water kept invisible dangers at bay, but the true strength of northern sailors came from something even more ordinary: their food. It was not a modern, clean, or refined diet. It was an ancestral system that worked because it was alive. The foundation was natural fermentation, a process that transformed their foods into something far more resistant and, unknowingly, far safer. Fish preserved in brine, acidic whey, sour milk, fermented vegetables. In Scandinavian homes, this was normal. On a ship exposed to constant cold, humidity, and the absence of fire, it was a crucial advantage. These foods were loaded with lactobacillus, beneficial bacteria that compete directly with pathogens. Today we associate them with probiotics and gut health. For the Vikings, they were simply part of daily life. The remarkable thing is that this diet could last for weeks without spoiling, even under brutal conditions. Fermentation created an acidic, stable environment, hostile to dangerous bacteria and highly effective for food preservation. It also strengthened gut microbiota, that invisible community that determines how the body responds to infections. On a voyage where severe diarrhea could cause fatal dehydration, this protection was invaluable. While other cultures relied on fresh foods or meats that spoiled quickly, northern sailors traveled with foods that preserved themselves, resisted moisture, maintained caloric value, and protected against intestinal infections. And here emerges a fascinating contrast. Today, most of us probably couldn't tolerate many of these foods. Our modern, highly processed diet, poor in natural ferments, has reduced our ability to handle strong flavors, intense acidity, and beneficial microbes. What was nourishment for them would be a challenge for us. Their bodies were adapted to it from childhood. Ours are not. And you? Could you maintain your strength on fermented foods day after day in an environment as harsh as the North Sea? What we do know is that this lactic acid-rich diet acted as an invisible but effective barrier, protecting them from infections that would have devastated any other crew. And if this already seems surprising, wait until you discover what they did with their own bodies. Because hidden in their daily discipline was another of their most powerful tools. 3. The discipline of the body. If there is something surprising about studying the life of northern seafarers, it is that they were nothing like the caricature of barbarians we often imagine. Their relationship with the body was practical, strict, and deeply strategic. It was not cleanliness in the modern sense. There was no soap, no hot water, no wellness rituals. But there was something equally powerful: functional discipline. As soon as they reached a safe shoreline, many would plunge into icy water, even if only for a few seconds. That thermal shock was not meant for comfort. It removed salt, sweat, and accumulated dirt, clearing the skin of impurities that could cause irritation or infection. When they couldn't bathe, they used a method as rudimentary as it was effective. They likely mixed sand with salt water and scrubbed their skin until it was clean. The friction removed debris and acted as a primitive form of natural disinfection. Bone combs, found in almost every Viking archaeological site, were not decorative objects. They were used daily, with persistence. On a cramped ship, lice could become an epidemic within days. But constant combing removed nits, reduced spread, and prevented serious parasite-related diseases. Before departing, they also washed clothes and blankets in fresh water from rivers. At sea, those fabrics quickly got wet again, but at least they started the voyage with a lower bacterial load. Everything suggests that for them, traveling with dirty clothing meant traveling in danger. When someone suffered a cut, scrape, or wound, something inevitable on these voyages, they likely used mixtures of oil and ash, a simple remedy that we now know has mild antimicrobial properties. It wasn't sophisticated medicine, but it was effective in their context. Even waste management followed clear rules. The sleeping area could not be contaminated. There were probably preferred spots along the ship's edge and strict social norms to ensure no one endangered the group's health. And then there was the Laugar Dagar, the washing day. Every 7 days, no matter what, the community did everything possible to wash. This weekly habit was so consistent that other Europeans mocked them for washing too much. Yet that routine broke infection cycles and maintained an exceptional level of hygiene for the time. None of this aimed at cleanliness for its own sake. It aimed at survival. A network of small gestures repeated with discipline that together created a solid defense against illness. Imagine for a moment maintaining that discipline in the midst of cold, humidity, and exhaustion, knowing that any lapse could put the entire group at risk. If anything proves their resilience, it is that their strength did not depend solely on tools or techniques, but on an unbreakable mindset. And yet, there was one aspect of their resistance even more surprising. A silent element, repeated for hours, that turned their own bodies into a tool against disease. What comes next reveals a piece of the Viking method that very few people know, and that completely changes how we understand their health at sea. 4. The rhythm that saved lives. In most maritime cultures, stillness meant rest. For northern sailors, it meant risk. Their environment was too cold, too humid, and too unpredictable to allow inactivity. That is why, paradoxically, fatigue was part of their survival. During many voyages, men would row between 6 and 12 hours a day, depending on the wind and the purpose of the journey. That continuous effort transformed their own bodies into a source of heat, something essential when humidity soaked their clothing and wind pierced their skin relentlessly. Movement activated circulation, raised internal temperature, and kept vital organs warm. On a ship where everything absorbed moisture, blankets, clothes, wood, air, this body heat was as important as water or food. But rowing didn't just warm them. It mobilized their lungs, cleared their airways, and helped expel accumulated humidity. Without medicine, tonics, or remedies, their breathing was their treatment. And there was more. Rowing positions were frequently rotated, forcing men to move across the entire vessel. This constant flow created a sort of natural ventilation, renewing the air in a space where dozens of men breathed and sweated together. Stale air never had time to accumulate. Humidity circulated. The ship, in a way, also breathed. That constant rhythm, harsh, repetitive, exhausting, not only propelled them toward their destination, it kept them alive. And now that you've rowed with us to this point in the journey, let me tell you something. If this voyage is fascinating you as much as it fascinates us to share it, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. That way you can continue discovering each piece of this method we are unveiling step by step. Because the journey does not end here. There is still more to uncover about how the ship itself, its structure, and its materials played a decisive role in their health. And beyond that, an element even more revealing awaits. Stay attentive. The best of the Viking method has yet to unfold. 5. The ship that breathed. When we imagine a ship from that era, we tend to picture a closed, damp, dark space. a place where any illness could spread with ease. But Viking ships were nothing like that. In reality, they functioned as a small, controlled ecosystem, an environment that, unintentionally, fought bacteria better than many ships from later centuries. Everything began with the material that shaped the vessel: oak wood. For the Vikings, it was synonymous with resistance, and modern science explains why. Oak contains tannins, compounds with antibacterial properties that hinder the proliferation of microorganisms. In a world without disinfectants, chemicals, or medicine, their ship already offered natural protection simply by being made of this material. To this, they added a second element full of practical intention: resin. They applied it to seal the planks and prevent leaks. But without knowing it, they were using a natural fungicide. Pine resin prevented fungi and bacteria from settling in the joints, especially in areas where moisture tended to become trapped. Each repair, each applied layer, added a new level of protection. But the real secret was not only in the materials, but in the ship's design itself. Unlike later vessels, which aimed to be hermetic, Viking ships were not completely sealed. The overlapping planks allowed small amounts of water to enter, which the crew then expelled through constant bailing. What may seem like a flaw was, in truth, a continuous cleaning system. Water entered and exited. It did not accumulate. It did not stagnate. It had no time to rot. On other ships, trapped bilge water became a breeding ground for bacteria, foul odors, and disease. But on a Viking vessel, such putrefaction barely had time to develop. The ship purged itself without stopping, and the ocean itself played a role. Salt water acts as a natural disinfectant, making it difficult for many microorganisms to survive. Any waste thrown overboard, food scraps, fluids, refuse, was diluted and dispersed quickly. Nothing remained, nothing fermented, nothing returned. The climate completed this system. The low temperatures of the North Atlantic slowed bacterial reproduction in the wood, on clothing, on tools, and in containers. What would have been a constant problem in warm climates remained under control thanks to the cold. Thus, without intending to, the Vikings sailed in an environment that did not accumulate dirt, did not retain moisture, did not trap air, did not hold waste, and did not favor bacteria. A ship that filtered, expelled, ventilated. A ship that, in a way, breathed. And it is inevitable to ask yourself, what would it be like to entrust your entire life to a structure so vulnerable and yet so ingenious, capable of cleaning itself as it moved across the sea? If this idea inspires any reflection, feel free to share it in the comments. Because this microenvironment, surprising and intuitive, was only one part of their resistance. The rest was not in the wood or in the salt. It was in them, in bodies prepared since childhood to withstand a world that would feel unbearable to us. And that final pillar of the Viking method changes everything. 6. Forged from childhood. No matter how ingenious the ship was, and no matter how precise their routines were, there was one element without which none of this would have worked: the Vikings themselves. Viking crews were not a random sample of society. They were the result of a way of life that, from childhood, shaped bodies capable of resisting what would physically break others in mere days. In many northern villages, children grew up exposed to cold, small cuts, minor infections, and physical labor from an early age. The modern idea of a protected childhood simply did not exist. Their bodies learned to respond to the environment long before adulthood. This continuous exposure most likely strengthened their immune systems in ways that today would seem almost unimaginable. Their gut microbiota, accustomed to fermented foods, acidic dairy, smoked foods, and cold environments, promoted a strong and efficient bacterial balance. Where a modern stomach would suffer for days, they barely noticed. The selection was not only biological, it was cultural. Young people who could not tolerate the harsh climate, the daily labor, or smaller expeditions rarely became part of an ocean-going crew. Those who did had unknowingly passed a constant filter of health, strength, and endurance. They were not superhuman. They were the direct product of their environment, of a world that demanded toughness from the cradle, of communities where cold, effort, and exposure to nature were not obstacles, but essential parts of life. And this is the piece that completes the method. The wood could help. The resin could protect. The food could strengthen. But none of that would have been enough without bodies capable of enduring that rhythm, that climate, and that sea. And one cannot help but wonder, what would happen if we, living protected, sanitized lives, tried to survive under the same conditions? This reflection leads directly to the next point, the inevitable comparison between them and us. 7. The invisible structure. Throughout this journey, we have gathered pieces that, when seen individually, were already striking. But only when we join them does the full truth appear. Viking survival did not depend on a single trick, but on a complex system working in unison. Each practice reinforced the next. Each decision prevented a risk that could trigger another. It was a silent architecture, extraordinarily efficient. Let us begin with water. They did not trust stagnant supplies. They chose whey, fermented drinks, and light beers, protected by their natural acidity. This allowed them to avoid one of the deadliest causes of illness on medieval voyages. Food followed the same logic. Fermented foods encouraged a robust microbiota, stabilized the gut, and reduced the risk of infections. Their diet became, unintentionally, a daily protective barrier. Functional hygiene added a constant defense. Combs to keep parasites at bay, cold baths, sand and salt water to clean the skin, ash and oils as improvised disinfectants, and strict rules for waste management. They were not seeking modern cleanliness. They sought sanitary control. Movement completed this strategy. Rowing for hours produced heat, kept their lungs active, and prevented internal humidity from becoming dangerous. Physical effort, far from weakening them, helped maintain their health. And then there was the ship itself. Wood with antibacterial properties, resin that acted as a fungicide, constant water filtration, continuous ventilation thanks to the movement of the crew. A vessel that, instead of accumulating dirt, expelled anything that might become a threat. To this system was added the human factor. Men accustomed to cold, effort, and daily exposure to microorganisms since childhood. Bodies shaped by a harsh environment, physically and culturally selected for resilience. And above all, one non-negotiable principle. On a Viking ship, waste was never allowed to accumulate. Nothing stayed, nothing fermented, Nothing had time to become a danger. The result is clear. Viking survival was not luck. It was a perfectly balanced mechanism in which environment, materials, discipline, and biology worked together. And perhaps by this point, you feel that clarity that appears when everything clicks. But this understanding also opens an uncomfortable question. Are we truly stronger than they were? Or do we simply live more protected lives? Because what comes next is no longer about northern sailors. It is about us. After understanding how that survival system worked, one final step remains to see the whole dimension of this story. A step not directed toward the past, but toward ourselves. Imagine for a moment that you are not observing a Viking. You are standing in his place. You with your current body, your diet, your hygiene habits, your way of life. Would your body be able to adapt, even for a few days, to such an extreme environment? The answer is as clear as it is uncomfortable. A modern person would begin to fall ill very quickly. Cold would be the first enemy. Constant humidity would penetrate clothing and lungs, weakening the body from the inside. Our thermal resistance, accustomed to heating systems and technical jackets, would collapse in a matter of hours. Then would come the second blow: diet. Our digestive system, accustomed to sanitized and refrigerated food, would react badly to natural fermentation, dense fats, and the absence of modern controls. Diarrhea, vomiting, and dehydration would appear rapidly. For a Viking, that was nourishment. For us, a biological challenge. The next shock would be bacterial. The microbiota of a 9th century Scandinavian was vastly different from ours. Microorganisms that lived with them from childhood, in food, on the skin, in the air, would enter a modern body unprepared. Our immune system, more protected but less trained, would respond with inflammation, fever, and weakness. Hygiene would complete the collapse. We live surrounded by antibacterial gels, treated water, and controlled environments. This very success makes us fragile. We are too hygienic to survive such conditions. The modern body would not tolerate the mix of sweat, salt, smoke, moisture, and constant contact with living materials. To all of this, add physical endurance. Rowing for hours, sleeping wet, waking up cold, maintaining the ship's rhythm. Most of us would reach our limit on the first day. But there is something important. This is not about personal weakness. It is about adaptation. They were shaped from childhood for their world. We have been shaped for another. And here emerges the question many avoid, but which defines this section. How many people in our society could endure even 1 week on such a ship without falling ill? The answers are always divided. And that debate says more about our era than about the Vikings. Because this final contrast does not only reveal how they lived, it reveals how much we have changed. By the time you reach this point, the story is no longer a mystery. What once seemed impossible, surviving weeks in an environment that would overpower us in days, now appears as the result of deep adaptation. The Vikings were not invincible. They understood their world and acted accordingly. Their way of eating, moving, building, living together, and interpreting their surroundings formed a system born not from coincidence, but from necessity and observation. They were not striving for perfection, they were striving to survive. And in that process, they found balance where we see only difficulty. perhaps that is the lesson that remains. It is not about strength or ferocity or myths. It is about understanding reality as it is and finding a way to live within it. If you have reached the end, thank you for joining me on this journey. Let me know by leaving the keyword resistance in the comments, so more people like you can discover these stories that deserve to stay alive. And tell me, which Viking survival method surprised you the most? I'll be reading your comments. Your presence here shows that curiosity is still alive, that there are still those who wish to understand how these peoples managed to defy the impossible. And if you haven't yet, this is the perfect moment to subscribe to CronoPlanet and activate the notification bell. Many worlds remain for us to explore together. And remember, the planet is full of places that hold secrets, of cultures that faced adversity, and of stories that still await their moment to be told. What you saw today is only one of them. The next stories are already on their way, and you won't want to miss them. We'll see you in the next documentary.